Here's the pitch. What if your grid-based tactics game stopped pretending a single perfect save file was the point, and instead dared you to die, learn, and come back meaner? Lost Eidolons' Veil of the Witch is that there. It grafts a roguelite spine onto a classic SRPG body, think Fire Emblem positioning, Final Fantasy tactics pacing, and asks you to build, break, and rebuild your squad until the island stops chewing you up. The question is whether the run-based structure amplifies the strategy or just pads the grind. Short answer: mostly amplify, with some caveats that bite. Context first, so you know what you're buying into. Ocean Drive Studio develops, with Cacao Games attached in some regions, running on Unity. Early access kicked off in November 2024. The full launch landed October 2025 on PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Previews landed in the 7-8 zone. DualShockers at 810 for its addicting, exciting loop and strong build craft. GameSpew at 810 praising progression and combat with an eyebrow raised at visuals and repeated scenarios. XboxEra at 7.210, still positive but dinging bland maps, missing modern SRPG conveniences and muddy presentation. The trend line is clear, the systems hit, the staging is uneven. Let's talk feel, because tactics live or die on feedback. Combat's a chewy blend of movement, economy, and timing windows. There's a simple but effective weapon armor matchup you can check at a glance, a zone of control system that punishes sloppy disengages, and multi-tile monsters that demand coordinated burst in a single round to crack, stun, and breathe. Skills don't nickel and dime you with mana bars, they ride turn counters, which subtly changes tempo decisions. Do you cash your big cooldown now to stun the brute and save your healer? Or do you kite 2 tiles to set up the archer's pin into a mage's AoE next round? The math is satisfying, and when you stitch together the perfect turn, enemies crumble like stale shortbread. The roguelite layer is the hook that keeps the loop crisp. Expeditions are your runs. 3 acts, boss gates at the end of each, forks in the overworld that tempt you with coin, resonance stones for gear upgrades, recruit chances, or risk-reward events with dice rolls that will absolutely clown you when you're feeling smug. Between runs, you pour permanent currency into the Altar of Fire to buff baseline stats and unlock helpful perks. Relationship points with your crew persist and can trigger combat effects later. Recruited allies expand your bench, so your 5-slot lineup becomes an honest choice, not a formality. That meta persistence is why failure isn't a waste. Even your losses are XP for the next plan. Where the game really sings is the build craft. Everyone can flex into multiple identities. You can spec your protagonist into a frontline shield with taunt and mitigation, pivot them into a crit stack duelist, or go full Legolas with immobilizing shots and explosive arrows that delete clustered undead. Resonance stones make gear progression a live tactical question. Concentrate power on your carry to brute force early bosses, or spread upgrades to survive attrition fights where a single downed unit snowballs into disaster. DualShockers calls the customization surprisingly deep, and that tracks. You're not just picking colors, you're architecting synergies. Now the friction points, because there are a few, and they matter depending on your tolerance for repetition. Multiple outlets note the maps are visually flat and tactically conservative. Elevation is largely missing, terrain interactions are limited. And while there are neat status synergies like drenching enemies before zapping them with lightning, you'll want more of that elemental chess than you get. XboxEra's critique of bland stages and absent side rear attack modifiers hits the same nerve as GameSpew's repeated combat scenarios. When the map variety dips, the run structure exposes it. You're back at the same junctions, making familiar choices, and without an auto-resolve or fast-forward on early trivial fights, the opening acts can feel like chores if you binge. Quality of life is mixed. The undo is great. 3 rewinds per is a smart guardrail that encourages bold lines without turning every turn into a save scum safari. But community chatter calls out the lack of mid-battle saves as hostile to adults with doorbells, pets, and kids. That's a fair ding in 2025. The exploration paths are enticing at first glance, but as DualShockers and GameSpew both imply, the fork variety could be broader. When a run's macro routing starts to feel predictable, You rely even more on your micro-optimizations to keep the dopamine flowing. Writing and VO though, unexpectedly solid. The setup is classic amnesiac hero, but Sable, the Witch of the Mists, gives the proceedings a Fable vibe, and your core squad, Evie, Marco, Laurent, Emile, has enough personality to sell the loop. Relationships aren't just flavor text. They carry combat bite later, and that's exactly how to do story in a roguelite. Reward affection with mechanics. XboxEra calls out the character art as lovely even while roasting the world's drabness, and that contrast is accurate. You'll vibe with the cast even when the scenery blurs. Difficulty lands in the sweet spot. Early expeditions will body you, as they should. Once you clear a run, you can toggle trials to scale the challenge and payouts, which keeps veterans honest and gear math relevant. Bosses hit like trucks. Bernhardt the Black Knight will absolutely send you back to camp if you disrespect his kit. And because permadeath isn't in play, the sting is time, not the loss of a cherished unit. This is roguelite, not Iron Man. The risk profile is aggressive but not cruel. Let's synthesize the critical split. DualShockers is high on the loop, the freedom to craft builds, the fairness of a system that rewards smart play. GameSpew agrees on the progression and the one more expedition stickiness, but calls out the PS5 visuals and rising repetition. XboxEra is the most exacting about missing modern SRPG features and level blandness, yet still enjoyed the overall package. Nobody disputes the combat core. Everyone wants more environmental spice and QOL. That tells you what to expect 6 hours in versus 60. The systems carry, the stagecraft needs a tune-up. Veteran Games' take is simple. If you crave tactical friction where your decisions matter every turn, and you don't mind learning by bleeding, Veil of the Witch is absolutely worth your nights. The roguelite scaffolding enhances the strategy because it turns each loss into a design lesson you cash in at the altar. The run structure plus build depth make experimenting fun, not wasteful. You will notice the seams, flatter maps than the genre's best recycled encounters, presentation that won't sell a TV, and a save model that assumes you can finish fights in one sitting. If you can live with those, the tactical juice is strong. Quick spoiler in 3, 2, 1. Mechanically, multi-tile bosses that crumble under coordinated mixed weapon bursts are the standout set pieces. Plan your turn order to stack break thresholds and you'll stun lock death itself long enough to win by inches. That's the kind of puzzle this game does best. Spoiler over, back to safe terrain. If this kind of no BS deep dive is your speed, hitch a ride with Veteran Game and hit subscribe. We measure systems, not hype. Toss a like if you've ever burned a drenched brute on purpose. Conductive cruelty deserves a little algorithmic love. I'll leave you with a spicy prompt for the comments. Does the roguelite reset make SRPGs sharper by forcing new builds every expedition, or do you still prefer a single pristine save where permanence gives every choice weight? Fight nice, plan nasty.